bringing up, the incident that happened was just really stimulating this idea of, okay, well, in my own life and with my children and then, with your grandkids and everything, do we, how would we feel if we were if we were the parents on this side of it? What's the teaching points that we could take away as a society from this? Because often it's easy for us, and we've talked about this with race and other different issues. It's always easy to point out the bad guy, get rid of him, he lost his job, and then we move on. And then another incident happens like this. What are the teaching points from what little bit of information we know? What teaching points do you take your granddaughter, or do you sit down with your granddaughter about this news story? What do you tell her from this?
Use your words.
Right.
That's what I say. There's always options. Use your words. If you're going to be in a classroom, there's rules, and we follow those. And in our family, that's what we do. We follow the rules, and you need to talk about it with me if something's not quite right. And sometimes the kid doesn't even know that something's not quite right, and the parent has to take an action. Which I actually did do about a month ago about something, which I never once had done with my grandchildren in their schools ever. But if I'm the one doing the picking up and I'm the one seeing whatever it is, then I decided that instance I was going to address it with the teacher and with the principal. And I did.
What do you do as a counselor? How do you help a person? Like let me go back to this, let me ask this question. What trauma or what issues could this cause for this young lady?
Well, I don't even know if she had any physical. I would have thought she would have hit her head.
Right.
There's that trauma. And then, fear of a man in a uniform.
So if
there could be that, too,
right. So if later on in life, you see a lot of people who experience these type of things. Is this something that commonly happens?
As far as triggers?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think we're talking about probably triggers that she would have or triggers that people have. It doesn't even have to be, it doesn't have to be something physical that happened to them, but it could be any kind of emotional trauma. One time I had somebody tell me that when she was 4 years old, she was standing at the curb and her mom and dad were fighting and her dad drove off and she never saw him again. Okay, well, there wasn't anything physically that happened to her. That was an emotional trauma.
Okay.
And that impacted her life in a lot of ways, as far as thinking relationship with men, how you would be, how you would mother someone, and just many, many things. So there are a lot of traumatic triggers that happen with people on various incidents, and sometimes we don't even know what those are going to be.
The reason why I asked that question is just because when it comes to us, is that something necessary to put into training for the officers that are going to be in the schools with our children to understand that these type of actions could permanently affect someone?
I would think that would be, and I don't know what the training is for the officers that are in the school, or if that was an actual police officer that in that situation, if there's actual police officers that have gone through the police academy and get certain kinds of training. Now there's more mental health training with officers, but I don't know about security guards.
No, this was an actual officer who was assigned, and that's actually assigned to that school. So it's well.
What do you think?
Well,
what do you think about these things, Drew?
I have a daughter who's that age, and what I've said to her. It was funny. This summer we had an incident that happened similar to this, where there were some young ladies who were being kicked out of a pool party in a neighborhood in Texas, and the cop slammed her to the ground, and It was the exact same thing. So I
Yeah.
watched that with my daughter, and I believe she wanted to some degree, detach herself away from that being reality. You know, they see these type of things on TV, and it's very hard for them to take it all in, and especially when you see, and in her case, it happened not too far from where she lives. And so that gave me the opportunity this summer to sit down and talk to her about some of the things that you say and you do in these types of situations. One of the things that I'm not necessarily proud of, but unfortunately I have to do, is I do have to warn my children that of the reality of what we, you know, of what this world is. You know, and that they can't leave their teachings behind. They can't leave behind the things that I've taught them. They can't leave behind the things that they know they've learned in church, in school, and in the household, because those values are some of the things that are going to save your life. If you continue, if you act in your emotions, if it's emotion, your emotion up against this person's emotion, that person could have the capacity to take your life. And you want to stay level-headed and hope that you play every situation. When a situation like that comes about, you want to make sure you stay as level-headed as possible and say and do the right things. And I hate that I have to actually prep my children in that way, because I don't feel it's necessarily fair.
Well, but one of the things that you're doing is that you're teaching them to think more critically.
Right.
And, you know, we always have options. We always have options. So that teacher had options, the girl had options, the security officer had options.
Yeah.
That was an incident that was totally out of control.
Yeah.
And it did not have to go there. And lots of times we find ourselves in situations like that, where it could go one way or the other. And we have to, that's why we have to talk to our kids about, well, what happened here? What do you think could have, what do you think would have worked better?
Yeah.
What do you think the problem was here? Do you ever see yourself in that situation? If a teacher told you something to do that you knew was a rule, would you do it? And why would you do it? Why would you not do it? I mean, talking, the communicating, getting deeper, digging deeper, besides just seeing what happened on the surface and just saying, well, that guy was wrong.
Yeah.
I mean, that is the easy thing to do. But then talking about the situation, like you did with your daughter in the pool party. Well, if you were in a situation where so-and-so happened, how do you think you would handle it? What do you think, what kind of outcome would you want to have?
Yeah. One of the things that my son, and talking to my son about these things, and him being candid, one of the things he's always expressed is a sense of fear for those type of situations, where it now even it kind of even alters the way that he does certain things. Like, I joked with him about walking home from school one night in the evening, and he more or less looked at it as, okay, it's just not a popular choice for him. Like, he's like, I'm a young black man. I'm not going to just be walking through the streets.
Yeah.
I mean, from either angle, whether it's us living in a nice neighborhood or whether it's living in a neighborhood that is more one way or another, that does not end well for me. So I'd rather get a ride until I can actually drive. And that is a legit thing that is weird, because if he has to, he's going to, he understands he'll have to make that walk if he has to, but it's not a preference. And that's not a freedom that he feels he necessarily wants to take advantage of. Where with me, it was a freedom not only did I never think twice of taking, but it was one that I believe I was very naive to some degree. I might have joked here and there, but the truth of the matter is, I didn't, I knew that it was okay for me to walk through any neighborhood. There were certain neighborhoods that you avoid, obviously. But for my son's life, it's a totally different ballgame, because what he's seeing on the news every day, it tells him, you don't do that.
Well, if our president said that he was, he was affected by this too, then it does affect young black men and lots of young people.
Yeah. And I think that's the biggest thing. I think one of the harder things for me also to see in this incident was how many times that physical violence I've seen, or not physical violence, so many times I've seen this type of discipline play itself out within my community,
Uh-huh.
and not really, I thought it was wrong, but it wasn't an outrage.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I've seen that exact same scenario actually play out in a high school when I was doing school day photography uh, a few years back here in Tulsa. The only difference in that scenario was it was a young black lady and a black security guard, and it was more or less. I remember my mindset at the time, just kind of looking at it as, man, she was out of hand because she was up and yelling, but there was no outrage.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes me it makes me today, years later, growing up a little bit more, and then even society changing more, it made me realize that wasn't okay.
And you've changed because you also are the father of children that age now.
Yeah, now that my children at that age, yeah, and I'm not a yeah, because back then I more or less looked at it as that's their problem.
Yeah.
That generation's
But
out
it
of
could be
control.
your problem.
Yes.
And you asked me off air, did I ever give anybody permission to use physical discipline or anything with any of my children at a school or at a daycare or anything else? And the answer was no. I've never given that permission to anybody.
And I think that's that's a hard thing nowadays. I don't. I've heard people say that. I've actually had several people say it to me that it's okay for me to discipline their children because they trust, that I would,
Well, discipline children is one thing, but physical discipline is another thing because, I think it is okay for an adult to say, now let's not do that. And, I think that if we're going to do that, that's not going to work and we're going to have to separate. I mean, I think that's okay myself. Some people don't even want to do that.
Yeah.
They just let a kid run wild, and I won't do that. I'll do something about it, but it's not going to be physical. It's going to be, some words that we're going to talk a little bit.
And I think that's the thing is like I've had a few people tell me, well, it's okay for you to spank my son.
Well, it's not.
And from my vantage point, I've always looked at it as I'm just uncomfortable doing it.
Uh-huh.
Just because it's just flat out that's
okay. Well, would you
child.
want somebody to spank your child or to physically discipline your children? Would you want that? Would you be comfortable with that?
Having children that are not of that age anymore is kind of a hard.
Well, how about your children that are of the age they are now?
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, at the age they are now, it's like good luck if you try to spank them. Like they're old enough to. I mean, yeah, I don't know. They can defend themselves now if you were to try to attack them in any kind of way. But
I mean, you wouldn't tell anybody they could do that.
No, not at the age that they are now, because even at the age they are now, I don't do it.
Yeah.
They operate.
It's not effective.
Yeah.
It's really not that effective.
Yeah.
So this old thing about, well, that's the way I was raised.
Yeah.
It didn't hurt me and all of that. Well, I'm going to take some issue with that.
Yeah.
I think it does hurt people. I think it does hurt their self-confidence, their self-esteem, their worldview, their trust, those kind of things. And I think it perpetuates violence in our world instead of peace.
Yeah, I agree. I 100% agree on that one.